Scott Lee, alcoholic.
Hey, Scott.
Let's take a few moments and acknowledge the presence of deity. Amen. Thank you. Here's a gift from my beloved back room from about 33 years ago. One of the sages said, God forgives me for everything I ever did, and he loved me while I was doing it. My God got bigger that day. And the fact is, I can't make a mistake so ugly that God can't turn it into something magnificent. We'll be demonstrating that here in a little while. I want to pick up where John left off at the bottom of 66, because I've got something I like to let my guys do. It says, this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Fritz defined spiritually sick as cut off from God. I'm not going to call on anybody, but if you bring to your mind now the one or two worst things you ever did. Weren't you cut off from God by your own hand when you were doing that? Had you been walking in the sunlight of the Spirit in conscious contact with His loving, laughing God, could you have done that? Absolutely not. Would you have thought of it? Probably not. And Don Major, don't go to bed tonight without getting one of Don's talks. He's probably the best we got on step 6 and 7. But he says it this way. If you look at my hands, he said, we realized. I can know something, but when I realize it, I get what my wife calls heart knowledge. We realized.
My priest gave me a definition of realized recently that I love. He says, realized in biblical terms means to bring to the present. I'm trying to bring this feeling to the present. This new idea that perhaps they were spiritually sick too.
So I asked him to pray the list once, and I didn't ask you to mean it. I asked you to pray it. Pray the list once. First name on the list, Fred. God help me realize that Fred is not a rotten SOB. He was just spiritually sick when he did that to me. Do not rehearse whatever Fred did. Substitute the word that. Second name on the list, Mary. God help me realize Mary is not a rotten human being. She was just spiritually sick when she did that to me. It's the beginning of the forgiveness process. And what I discovered at the high school football coach, who I said didn't play me as much as I deserved, when I started trying to pray this is what I discovered. When I went to practice, I didn't practice very hard. And there were other guys on our team at the same position I played that were better than I was. And the fact is, he probably played me more than I deserved. Fancied or reeled. Some of the fancied will bubble up at this particular place. And then this next thing John read, though we did not like their symptoms the way they disturbed us, they like ourselves were too good. The symptom of their spiritual sickness is whatever they did. It's column 2. That left me with a resentment. The way they disturbed me is my resentment. And then the great truth, they like ourselves were sick too. Yeah, Tony?
Are we on the 4th column
No,
now?
Almost.
we're a long way from the 4th column.
Okay, no.
Most people assume that what follows column 3 is column 4. Not so. It is these observations and prayers that are life-changing way before we get to column 4. It isn't actually possible to get to column 4 without doing this other stuff first. And someone else had asked that question. Thank you. We meant to make that point.
I didn't want to seem stupid if I asked you, but that's how I got here.
No, congratulations on asking. I mean, it's okay.
Now, I've done this 4-step all across the country and some other parts of the world, and many of us think, well, the 4-step's done. I've got my 3 columns. It matches what Bill's done, and off we go. And, we'll read this next page, but don't really take these instructions literally.
And it says, we ask God. I suspect that's a prayer. So the 4th step, as I understand it today, is a series of lists, observations or considerations, and prayers, covering 3 specific aspects of self, which are resentment, fear, and sexual misconduct. I claim there's not a sex inventory in this book. It inventories only the dark side, sexual misconduct. There is not a direction that says, what did you do in that arena that was right and good? For example, making love with your wife. Nothing wrong with that. So that's not covered in there, so it's just the misconduct. And the format is a series of lists, observations, and prayers covering those. So it's a 9-part piece. I count about 26 very specific instructions. We put them together one piece at a time. And this one says, this one's a prayer. We ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience we had cheerfully granted a sick friend. Page 164. And I finally made peace with this because I had a lot of trouble with it. Second full paragraph, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Bill is saying we're going to find more. A woman named Wynne Laws found more. She wrote a story entitled Freedom from Bondage. And most of my teachers got sober on the third edition. This story is not in the third edition. And so it was a long time for me before I was able to make peace with it, and it is from that reading on page 164. More was disclosed. On page 551, she's talking about a resentment against her mother. She says, one morning I realized I had to get rid of it. That's a resentment against her mother. For my reprieve, a reprieve is a stay of execution. It reminds me that I have a disease so powerful it kills people that don't even have it. For my reprieve was running out. If I didn't get rid of it, I was going to get drunk, and I didn't want to get drunk anymore. In my prayers that morning, I asked God to point out to me some way to be free of this resentment. During the day, a friend of mine brought me some magazines to take to a hospital group I was interested in. I looked through them. A banner across one featured an article by a prominent clergyman in which I caught the word resentment. I'd like to observe the sequence of events. Item 1, she sees something about herself that needs some work. Item 2, she prays about it. Now, I would like to add, for me, item 3, talk to a spiritual advisor. And then item 4, she gets involved trying to do something for somebody else, completely out of herself. She's trying to take something into a hospital group. She's clearly out of herself, trying to carry a message of some kind. And item 5, her answer falls out of the sky on her. It is a predictable sequence of events. I got a problem. I pray about it. I talk to John or one of my other spiritual advisors about it. I take a meeting into the jail. I come out. The meeting's laying on the hood of the car. It's on my answering machine. It's in the mailbox when I get home. One of my sponsees calls me with it while I'm in the car on the way home. It falls out of the sky on me. It is a predictable sequence of events. Continuing on 552, he said, in effect, if you have resentment you want to be free of. Well, we just killed you 7 times. Do you want to be free? If you'll pray for the person or thing you resent, you'll be free. Ask in prayer everything if you want for yourself to be given to them. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, you'll be free. Even when you don't really want it for them and your prayer's only words, and you don't mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. Didn't ask you to mean it. You can't. And it goes on to say that it'll work in 2 weeks. If you're working, I'm working with a guy right now. I just started working with him, and he just finished his 4th column. I actually gave him direction 2 in the car on the way over here yesterday. And I said, how many resentments you got? He said, about 150. I said, it's a good number. The shortest list I've ever seen I thought was complete was just under 50. It was a very young man. He was about 17. He just wasn't that angry. The longest list I've ever seen was 1,200. I've seen it twice. The last guy I cut off at 1,200. I said, that's enough. He hated everybody, wished there was more of them. But the average runs somewhere between 150 to about 300. If I see a list under 100, I'm concerned. I cover it again. Forget about resentments. We're looking for everything and everything that's ever made you add. When I take a look at that prayer on 552, I'm praying for them. The prayer on page 67, I'm praying for myself. So we're going to add those 2 prayers together. We're going to continue to schedule 3 30-minute periods a week. Plus, I want you praying in the shower, driving the car. I want you constantly in prayer. You begin your prayer sessions by talking to God about the 2 or 3 worst things you have ever done and how much you crave His forgiveness. And begin praying the list. First name on the list, Fred. God, help me show Fred the same tolerance, pity, and patience I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And then I go ahead and add that prayer on the back. I prayed for myself. God, help me show him tolerance, pity, and patience. The prayer on 552, I'm going to pray for him. I prayed that his hair doesn't fall out, that he gets promoted at work, that he wins the Tennessee lottery, that he gets a new car, that his kids go to school on scholarship and don't give him any trouble, that his wife is a fabulous lover, that his lawn grows lush and green but it grows so slowly he only has to mow it once a year. Be creative. Right. The further you can go, the better. Having prayed that, and it takes about that long, we have a yes or no question. Do you mean it? Yes or no. Not are you trying to mean it? No. Do you know you're supposed to mean it? Not do I want you to mean it. Do you really hope Fred has all that great stuff? If the answer is no, go to the next name. If the answer is yes, put a check mark by Fred's name and go to the next name. And when we get to the end, we'll go back and start over doing the ones that aren't checked. And if I sponsor you, we're going to do these until they're all checked. The first guy I worked with that had 1,200 resentments prayed his list 2.5 times before he checked the first one. Today they're all checked. I've watched it time and time again. I watched a man forgive the man that murdered his son. Now, if you've got someone that's done something worse than that to you, you can talk to me about how this might not work. But up until then, I ain't buying it. I've seen too much. I watched myself forgive the man that beat me out of $100,000 in about 1985. Probably not a lot of money to you, it was quite a bit to me. And you notice my demeanor didn't change when I told you that? If he walks in today, I can sponsor him and love him. I received the gift of not hating him anymore. So with this prayer, I think of resentment as ice around my heart. And what I'm doing is I'm holding an icy heart up to the sunlight of the Spirit. Sunlight will melt ice. Now, the ice has a thickness based on how severe the events were and how long ago and how much I've fed that resentment. And the sunlight has a power based on how close I can hold it and how long. Sunlight will melt ice. It's just going to take some time. Typically, somebody will pray the list a time or two, and somewhere in the middle of the list, all of a sudden they start checking them off, and they check off a whole page. And they're worried. I say, no, that's not at all unusual. This will take some time, sometimes 2 or 3 months. If it goes beyond that, we need to talk. I had one guy get down to 20 and they just wouldn't budge. And I finally asked the question, I said, do you ever talk about these people? He said, oh yeah, I'll call my roommate from treatment every night and talk about these old SOBs. I said, no. You know, we're not doing that anymore. And 2 weeks later, his list was all checked off. So you got to quit feeding these things because they're destroying you, absolutely destroying you. I believe for me, this is the most important direction we've got, to dig this poison out of my soul. And as you go through this process, if you've never done it like this before, as you begin to check off these names, people are going to look at you, they're going to see a difference, and they're going to ask you if you've lost weight. And the answer is yes, you have. Yes, you have, because these things are weighing your soul down. And there is we talk about a new freedom. The old freedom was 4 shots of Cuervo Gold, right? And I could come out and play. The new freedom is I'm not carrying anything negative inside me, and I don't want anything. When I get one of these things, I get rid of it as fast as I can. I can't afford the price. It says, for when harboring such feelings, not when having. I'm okay if I have a resentment if I'm not harboring it. We've just told me how to not harbor. I'm okay if I have one. As long as I'm in process here, I'm just fine. That's been my experience. I didn't think I was going to stop, did you?
I did not. You must have forgotten something. Yeah, it's important to underline that and highlight that, because many people say, well, the book doesn't really tell us to, pray down the list as, we've come to talk about it. Well, it clearly does. It says we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience. But, if our job is to do what they did, that's an instruction in just kind of reverse form. Going down the page, so as Scott says, I ask my guys to do this in 30-minute sessions, and I love that part in Freedom from Bondage where it talks about I fed it and fanned it as one might a delicate child. And I won't, when a guy, is struggling with some stuff, don't stop talking to this about everybody, because that's what she's talking about. On the way home, I'm talking about it with somebody, or texting about it, or I don't do social media, but Facebooking about it, and so Instagram and MySpace, I guess, is the new one, right? MySpace is the latest.
You're not asking me that. Did you not see this gray hair?
So we do this. We pray down this list until they're gone, and I've never seen it not work. And this is the difference in this and the step work in the 12 and 12. In the resentment inventory, in the fear inventory, in the sex inventory, it's the prayer where the relief comes. Remember, I can't fix me. We agreed on that in the previous steps. So picking up.
Let me toss in another little piece here. Acceptance does not have to include approval. Acceptance is when I stop fighting on a heart level something over which I have no power. I don't have to approve. We're not asking you to approve of anything these people have done. I absolutely, thoroughly, and violently disapprove of a lot of what's happened to you. Shame on them. Especially those of you who were abused as children. Shame on them. You didn't deserve that. That was wrong. It will always be wrong. And nothing will ever make it right. And we're not asking you to approve of that. I disapprove of it, and I will always disapprove of that. And I'm sad to the depths of my soul that happened to you. It wasn't right. And you didn't deserve it, and you didn't do anything to cause it. I like to tell people that if they have some that won't release, typically they're things that happened in childhood. They get that resentment list down to 5 or 6 that just won't budge. And talk to them about that. That we're not asking you to approve of this. Absolutely not. And to use all of those words. There's something inside that needs to be told for those who were abused as children, that it wasn't your fault, and it wasn't right, and it's never going to be right, and shame on them, and you're not responsible. And I'm sick at heart and so sad that happened to you. Something inside needs to hear that. I cannot explain that to you, but I've had that experience. Typically, those are the ones that won't move.
We avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. Always comes back to that. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one.
How's that for a promise?
Pretty good. And this is where I think the instructions, where it really tells us that we have to do this until the resentment's gone. Because it says, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. This is probably the most misquoted part of our work. People say, well, I did the 4 step and I found out what my part was. It's not what it says. It says we're looking for our mistakes.
If I'm looking for my part, there are 2 parts. All right? Somebody has a part and I have a part. You want to guess which one of these is mine? Okay? All right. So in the first place, it doesn't say to look for my part. If I've gone through this prayer process and received the gift of forgiveness, there are no parts. There are no parts at all. That's all gone. And we're down very simply to, the only time I think about that guy that beat me out of that money and some of these other things is when I use it for an example here. It does not weigh on my spirit at all. It is just not there anymore. It is simply not present. So I'm looking for my mistakes. And if I still hate him, if I have not been through this prayer process, I can't think about him and put out of my mind what he did. Can you? So it's really important to do these things a piece at a time. It's the reason we're not at column 4 yet, is because we have a tremendous amount of prayer work to be done between column 3 and column 4. It's where the action is. And I think if you get hung up on the idea of writing a 4-step, you'll miss it. And it's the thing that scares me about all the 4-step guides and all the other things I've ever seen, is they don't have the emphasis on the prayers and the observation, which is where the changes happen.
Yeah, it clearly says that putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done us, and that's this goal that we've been after the whole time, this bringing to the present this idea that perhaps they were spiritually sick too. Now, that I might not have done what they've done, but I've done other spiritually sick things as well. Some worse, some better. But it goes back to that main question of, is it forgiveness for me or forgiveness for everybody? And here's what we call the 4th column. Now, Bill doesn't say to write this in the 4th column, but he clearly asks us to answer these questions. We resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? That sounds like a question that we have to answer. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We had admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. So this question that we go back to, where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? That's what we call the 4th column. In your 4th column at the top there, write those 4 words. It's easy, multiple choice. Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened.
I'd like to talk about what those things say to me. They are the earmarks of self in the first position. Selfish, I want what I want, and I'm not even thinking about you, and I don't care if it hurts you. Selfish. Dishonest, I'm willing to lie, cheat, steal to get my will. Self-seeking, I'm on a constant mission to get what I think I want. And it's really sad that you're standing in my way, because I am going to run over you. And I'm not thinking about you at all. And frightened, fear is simply the concern that I may not get my will or something I think I want at some time in the future. Fears are always in the future. We'll cover this later. But let me read that list again, and let's chase it through the book. Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. So there's the earmarks of the reemergence of self. We find it again on page 84 in the reading on step 10, about 12 lines from the bottom. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. It's the exact same list. We find it again at the top of page 86 in the reading on the 11th step, in the first paragraph, where we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid. We find a similar list on page 88, much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. Similar list. Similar list on page 145. We have enemies, by the way. Paragraph begins in the center of the page. The greatest enemies of alcoholics are resentment, jealousy, envy, frustration, and fear. Very similar list. Those things all have to do with the reemergence of self. It's the thing that I have to watch for. It's what we're trying to get rid of here. Remember back in step 3, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. So we have to continue to watch for that root growing back.
So let's take 60 seconds. Let's do that fourth column, multiple choice, selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened.
I have a question.
What you got, Rob?
So for this, we're not saying in regards to this event that we're resentful about. We're just saying in regards to the person, anything we've ever done to them, selfishly, dishonestly, fear-driven.
In regard to this relationship, where did I display one of these qualities?
And something else too, as you look at the list of everything you've ever been angry with, if there's a religion there, you start praying, you pray for the people in that religion. If there's a principle, it's the people who practice that principle. It always has to come back to people. Always has to come back to people.
And if you're perhaps referring to, I don't know if you're not, and you don't have to answer, a lot of people say, well, I was a kid, I was abused, I didn't have a mistake here, this is not about assigning blame or deserving or any of that. Sometimes the mistake for us is, as it says, dishonesty, maybe just, I waited 30 years to talk about it, and that's just for an observation. This is not about placing blame. We really need to understand that,
There's another question over here. Yes, sir.
Self-seeking, I noticed, like in the other lists you were reading, that it was kind of substituted with resentfulness. But maybe you could define self-seeking for me, how it's separate from selfishness.
Self-seeking is separate from selfish.
From selfishness,
Is it has to separate the two?
or just define self-seeking.
To me, self-seeking is the fact that I'm never thinking about what somebody else might want or need, that my thoughts are 100% on me. Selfish is taking actions totally irrespective of how it has a negative impact on someone else, not thinking about something they might like to have or do, whereas selfish is something where I will just come barreling over someone.
So I just want to be clear, the fourth column is what you did that was selfish, dishonest, self-seeking as a result of the person that you were resentful for?
Yeah, it's your mistake. It's your mistake.
It's the mistake you made.
Yeah, so on high school football coach, my mistake was I didn't practice very hard. On left me for another guy, I didn't treat her very good. And I was selfish and I was frightened. There's not much room in that fourth column, and that's by design. We're not here to beat me up. That's not the purpose. You don't have much room. You don't need much. It's short. Where was your mistake?
Like I lied.
Yeah, I lied. A mistake on the childhood thing, is John just touched it, is I carried this for 30 or 40 years without getting any help for it. There's a mistake somewhere in all of that. And I would note,
No, go.
this last sentence, we admitted our wrongs honestly, we're willing to set these matters straight, sounds a lot like step 8. We're going to see that again here in step 4, this willingness to set these matters straight.
You want to pick up fear from there?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
It's your only chance.
So, as it's laid out, that's the resentment inventory in the big book. As I said, we're not going to finish that today here. So, I asked my guy to flip a number of pages forward.
Mm-hmm.
So we, have some room here to pick up this resentment inventory, because they will really start, from my experience, they really start coming back after I start doing this work. So bottom of 67, let's pick up the reading there. Notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties of Brown, Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes if we think fear ought to be classed with stealing, it seems to cause more trouble. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. Again, it's kind of a general instruction, very, very similar to the beginning of the resentment inventory instructions. But here it gets clarified. We put them on paper even though we had no resentment in connection with them. So I asked him to list down the page in full sentences their fears. And what I've found at the end of the day is that, all the guys I saw, we all have the same fear list, but I just have them write them out, I'm afraid she's going to leave me. I'm afraid she's going to stay, I've had both at the same time, Yeah.
Should the list of fears you write down directly correlate with the names of the people in your first column?
No, it's a new inventory.
No.
It's a new inventory,
No,
yep.
That's gone. Just moving along. There's a clue in there that we have a resentment involved with some of the fears, and some of them don't have a resentment involved. There are two kinds. If the typical list of resentments is 150 to 300, the typical fear list is about 20 or 30. So don't squeeze yourself trying to get on. First time I did this workshop was in Cincinnati 25 years ago, and a guy said that he had a fear that he looked both ways before he stepped off the curb because he had a fear of getting run over by a bus. Now, he may well have bussophobia. I don't know. I look both ways before I step off the curb because I think that's what intelligent people do. It's not a fear thing. Fear is that thing that grips you, right? Snakes, spiders, some people heights. I don't have that one. Falling. A lot of men think they have a fear of holding a baby. That's not it. They have a fear of dropping a baby. It's different.
Which is really about the fear about not being good enough. And
Yes. Yeah, that's really the core for so many of them. The fear of failure. Big one is fear of success, particularly if you get here like I did, convinced that you're no good. I'm afraid of success because if I succeed, I know it's going to be dumb luck. And if you see it, you're going to expect me to do it again, and I know I can't. So I've got a fear of success as well as a fear of failure. Need a list of fears. And I have some friends, some people I respect greatly, who get a 4-column inventory out of this fear thing. I don't get that. But that's how you do it. I think that's spectacular. But work out of this book. I think there are a lot of great ways to do this.
so let's take a second to make our list. Take a minute or two.
And turn doing what we're doing, turn a bunch of pages because you're going to need some more room for that resentment inventory.
That was a big sigh over there. It's going to get better. Relief's coming.
And once again, this list doesn't have to be perfect. They'll bubble up. You'll find them. Scott Redmond, don't go to bed tonight without getting one of Scott's talks. He said, if you're new, don't worry about getting in touch with your feelings. Stick around here, do what we do. They'll get in touch with you.
My first sponsor used to say, if you don't take your inventory, somebody else will. It'll be the judge, divorce attorney, the boss. You know, we didn't point this out at the beginning of this little session, is that with all of these, the sessions that we do to write our resentments or our fears, I always take a second at the beginning of those to invite God into the process, get quiet, 60 seconds of silence or meditation, just to really get, this is not something I want to do when my kids are running around the kitchen floor, hitting each other with, frying pans and the phone's ringing and the pot's boiling, This is life and death stuff, and I have to treat it that way. So after we have this list of our fears, this is kind of my favorite trick to play on my guys. I say, well, why do you have these fears? And they, give me a million different answers, and I say, well, the answer's in the book, and they take a little break, and it's on the next sentence. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? I'm pretty sure that they just put this in the book in 2014, because it was not there when I did it the first time. I mean, if you think that through, that makes such sense. Why do we have these fears? Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? So every time I'm posed with a situation, either new or old, my brain is this computer. And it, in a second, goes back through my entire history and realizes that every time that I've been in management, every time I've taken controls, it's been a complete disaster. And so it applies that result to this future prospect situation. Well, you're going to screw it up again? I mean, it just makes all the sense in the world. Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great confidence, but it didn't solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. Perhaps there's a better way. So here's the solution to this. We think so. For we're now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God.
Page Roman numeral 16, XVI, in the forward to the second edition. This is something that was just added not too long ago, I think. Forward to the second edition, it's the second page in the forward to the second. Bill is about to lead the Oxford groups, and about 10 lines down, he says, though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others. This next part is the one that just bottomed my socks. The necessity, I wonder if that's important. The necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. And what strikes me is that Bill separates belief in God from dependence upon God. I got here, I think the way many people do, pretty much believing there's a God and not having a higher power. It is as I learn this healthy dependence that I have my own definition of higher power. But belief in God and dependence upon God are very, very separate concepts. And that's where I first saw that. I thought that was such a powerful thing, so I wanted to add it. So it says back here on 68, the basis of trusting and relying upon God.
Keep talking, I'm looking something up.
We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We're in the world to play the role He assigned. Step 1, Section B, I am no longer in management. Management's responsible for how it comes out. I'm blue collar. I clock in, I clock out. I make the decisions during the day of the things we're going to do.
Stop there for a second, if I can. For we're now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. The definition of basis is a fundamental need, underlying requirement. So it's not even, when I first read that, I thought basis meant kind of like a good idea. But it's much different than an underlying need, a requirement. This is my new guidepost. This is the set of rules or principles that I'm going to live by. I'm going to trust and rely upon not just a God, but an infinite God. A fun exercise for the second step. If one of your guys or gals is really struggling, have them go through the first 4 or 5 chapters and have them underline or highlight every adjective that Bill uses for a power greater than ourselves. And that's one of them there. We trust the infinite God rather than our finite selves. Go ahead, Scott.
just to the extent we do as we think he would have us and humbly rely on him to see enable us to match calamity with serenity, it's permission to make a mistake. That's where I found it. Just as I do as I think he would have me, I don't always know. But if I'm trying to do what I think he wants me to do next, I still make mistakes, but I make a better quality mistake. We already talked about that. That's progress. It's okay that I make mistakes. It's my assignment. There's permission right there.
And what I've learned, the exact opposite is true. The more that I can practice, because I never, by any close means, master this, but when I can start to rely on this power and tap into this power, consequently, I become less fearful because I'm operating on a different basis. Fear runs my life less.
It says we never, that's kind of a strong word, we never apologize to anyone depending on our Creator. That concept is so important, they're going to tell me twice in this paragraph. We laugh at those who think spirits are the way of weakness. Paradoxically, is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. There it is again. Instead, we let him demonstrate through us what he can do. We ask him. I think that's a prayer. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us do. That's not what it says. What he would have us be. So I found that on page 133. And you talk about some power in some words. Second line, 133. We are sure. That's kind of strong. We are sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. My experience has been that free had to come first. It is through the process of the 12 steps that I get my own definition of freedom. Freedom is when I accept full responsibility for living with the results of all of my own actions. At that point, I'm free to do absolutely anything I'm prepared to live with the consequences of. What I had to learn is that the rules apply to me. They never did. Rules and instructions for people not as smart as I am. And now the rules apply to me. And I have to be like Lombardi's D-back. I have to be the one that applies them to me. So back on 68, I'll read that like it says. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. And once we commence to outgrow fear, commence means to begin to outgrow fear. It seems to me that if I can outgrow fear, fear is a lack of growth. Spiritual growth is my guess. I'd like to share a story a girl from my home group told. She was in a bank standing in line getting ready to cash a check, and all of a sudden there's a hairy arm around her throat and a pistol in her ear, and she's a hostage in a bank robbery. And when she talked about it, she said that all of her fears were in the future. That as she stood there with a pistol in her ear, she was really okay. She was physically uncomfortable and not free to go about her business as she would have preferred to, but if she could have stayed in the moment, she was really okay. Her fear was that he would shoot her, or that he would kidnap her. But if she could have stayed in the moment, she was really okay. And that's when I got it. My fears are all in the future, without exception. My fears are all in the future. And I think the single hardest assignment I've ever been given is one day at a time. And I blew that off when I first saw it. Yeah, I don't drink today. How about live only in this day? I have 3 vocabularies. I have a speaking vocabulary, a praying vocabulary, and a thinking vocabulary. And I have to keep the word today very active in all 3 of those. My little time travel machine is a 1-seater. If I go into the future, I go alone, and I'm in bad company. There's one who has all power, that one is God. May you find him now. Now isn't when I find God, it's where. My God is the God of right now. And when I mentally go into the future, I go alone. And he's not there. And when the future becomes today, he'll be there. But he's not there. So I need to stay out of the future. And that flies in the face of what I've been taught. All my life I've been taught, figure it all out. What's the critical path? And prepare for what they can do, not what you think they're going to do. And plan A and plan B and plan C and all of that. And all of those things take me out of right now, this precious moment, this narrow membrane between the past and the future that I rarely visit. And the word today enables me to be here. I just gave this assignment to a fellow yesterday, and I've given it to most of the guys I sponsor more than once. And it's to take big sheets of paper and write the word today with a Sharpie I want one on the mirror where he shaves. I want one on the socks and the sock drawer, one on top of the underwear, one on the dashboard of the car. The screensaver says the word today, and say it out loud every time you see it. And let's get that word into your vocabulary. And get your the closest members of your team. Tell them you're working hard on one day at a time. And when we talk, if you don't hear me using the word today, please remind me. I need to be called on it. And the question isn't, what am I going to do about my relationship? It's the wrong question. The question is, what am I going to do about my relationship today? What am I going to do about my finances? What do you do about your finances today? You feel the difference in those questions? Massive difference. All of the good questions contain the word today, and all the good answers contain the word today. And sometimes I have to say to somebody, yeah, I think that's a problem. I want to hear the question again. I want to hear the word today in the question. I'll let you and I explore answers that contain the word today. And let's quit trying to fix the rest of your life. We're no good at it. I'd like to read the first paragraph in the Big Book's chapter, Figuring It All Out. But we don't have that chapter. And I'm not going to be able to do that. And what that tells me is that it's not my assignment. That I have to get out of the business of figuring it all out. That's not why I'm here. That's not it. I have a new manager. He can figure it all out. All of my assignments are in this day. Now, part of assignments today are making plans for the future. Like, I'm going out of town next weekend. I'm planning to drive. I have a hotel room. But I plan action. I project results. Planning action is a very logical part of today if it's very specific action, like a hotel room, an airline ticket. But when I start figuring, I'm going to say this and they're going to say that, and when they say that, I'm going to say this, but if they say the other, then I'm going to... And that's the crazies. Got to get the word today back into it. Hardest assignment I've ever been given, one day at a time. I think except for sponsorship, most of the men I sponsor sober over 20 years. And we talk more about one day at a time than anything else except sponsorship. It's that hard. We have to be reminded. They have to remind me. I need help with that. But when I stay in the right now, right here, I'm really okay. This right here, right now, this is the future we used to be terrified of. This is it. You guys okay? Everybody okay? Good. How about now? How about now? Right. To be in the now. And when I do that, I don't have the fears. My God is the God of right now. I need to be here where He is.
Thanks, Scott. That's as painful as the fear inventory is. That's it. Making a list, saying some prayers, and moving on. This is not a, as Scott says, figuring it all out process. Bottom of 68. Now about sex. Many of us need an overhauling here, but above all, we try to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cry out that sex is the lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we don't have enough of it, or it's not the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow no man flavor for his fare, and the other would have us on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. And I want to stop there and throw in an opinion. I think that's the most abused sentence in the book sometimes. I hear people saying, well, I'm not the arbiter of anyone's sex life, and that's true. I mean, we don't tell people what their ideal should be and what they should do and what shouldn't do, but there's some clear instructions later that talk about putting in each relationship to this test, is it selfish or not? In these days of social media and easy hookups, and it's been many guys come to me and say, well, I told her the truth. I told her I wasn't interested in a relationship, and I was honest with her at the beginning. And my experience is that at some point or another that doesn't hold true. That in a sexual relationship, if two people want to be as they say, just friends or something, at some point feelings happen, and a lot of times the excuse I hear, or what I hear from guys is, or if it's with a new girl, I won't sponsor a guy who won't leave a new girl alone, right? Like, one of the worst things we can do is take somebody early in recovery and slow them down. I mean, the book does not say anything about a year or anything like that, but I think we have the ability here to really hold people back from their recovery and into a relationship.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say about this, too. I asked Don about this, not being the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. This is what I believe. As a sponsor, I've agreed to tell him the truth. And if I see him in any category moving toward a drink instead of away, I have to say so. And it's not necessarily for him, it's for me. So that if he does, in fact, get to the drink, he could go to prison, he could die. I mean, the price on a relapse can be pretty high, and I have to sleep knowing I told him the truth. So if I see him going in a direction that I think is going to take him toward a drink, I have to say so. I asked Don, what do you do about this arbiter of anyone's sex conduct? And he said, when I get a new guy to sponsor, if he's married, it's pretty obvious, but we talk about it. If he's single, I say to him, I'm going to ask you to leave the ladies alone until I can get you through these 12 steps. As sick as you are, healthy women run screaming away from guys like you. Now, you may have one fooled currently, but she's eventually going to wake up. Part of the process here is we will get you pretty healthy through this process, which will put you in a position to attract a healthy female. Now, you can ignore my advice I've given you in this category, and I will not drop you from sponsorship for it. But don't bring me the problems you create for yourself in this arena. I've already told you what I think you need to do. So I don't need to listen to it. The other reason I want him to leave them alone is I want his time and energy on this work, because there's a lot of time and a lot of energy required for this work. So I don't want to be the arbiter, but I'm going to lay it out for him very, very clearly. So what I think you need to do / not need to do. The book goes on to say we all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? That's what we're here for. Not here to bash you. Not the purpose of the exercise. That's not what we're here to. We are, in the next hour, going to get very, very specific about some of this stuff, because lives are at stake here. And I need to let you know that. So I'm going to give you a long break this time, 10 minutes and 17 seconds.
Good spot to break. I'm loving the back and forth with you.
Yeah, I think that plays pretty well, except